June 15th, 1941. 6:03 a.m. Holfaya Pass, Libya, Egypt frontier. The desert is already waking up angry. Heat shimmering off stone, a thin wind pushing dust across the escarpment like smoke. Down on the flats, the horizon trembles, and in that trembling you can barely make out the shapes that matter. At first they look like rocks. Then they move. A line of British tanks, dark silhouettes in the morning glare, grinding forward in slow confidence. Matilda, two infantry tanks, thick-skinned and stubborn, the kind of machines that made crews feel immortal. Their tracks chew the sand into pale scars. Their engines sound distant, muffled by the desert's open space, until they don't. Up on the ridge, a German gun crew lies still under netting and scrub that isn't really scrub, just branches arranged to trick the eye. You can almost feel the grit in their teeth, the way dust sticks to sweat the moment it forms. Nobody speaks above a whisper. They don't need to, because they're not waiting to fight a tank. They're waiting to erase one. The weapon beside them doesn't look like a tank at all. It looks like a long, elegant spear on a cruciform mount. Thin shield plate, spidery outriggers, a barrel that seems too long to belong to anything meant for anti-aircraft. The crew calls it by its official name. 8.8 centimeters flak 36, sometimes 36/37, depending on the fittings and sights, but the soldiers on the ground will call it something else later. They'll call it a legend. They'll call it curse. And some, when they only catch a glimpse through dust and panic, will swear they were hit by a tank they never even saw. The gun commander, an unteroffizier with sand ground into the seams of his uniform, keeps one eye on the range markings and the other on the approaching line. He's calm in the way a man becomes calm when he's accepted the rules of his world. Either the enemy keeps coming, or you stop him. Beside him, the layer rests his hand near the traversing wheel, ready to swing the barrel by degrees, not by drama. The loader crouches with a brass-cased round that feels warm even before it's fired, fingertips tight around metal slick with oil. Somewhere behind them, another crew tends another gun, spaced out just enough that one shell can't silence the whole battery. The Matildas keep advancing. From down there, through periscopes and narrow slits, British crews scan for German armor, panzers, muzzle flashes, anything that looks like the enemy they expect. They've fought before. They know what a pack gun can do, what a Panzer III looks like, what danger usually sounds like. But the danger on this ridge is different. It's patient. It doesn't chatter like machine guns. It doesn't rush forward with a turret swinging. It waits with the stillness of something that knows it has the range. The gun commander lifts his binoculars. The Matilda's outlines sharpen, big, boxy, almost arrogant. Behind them, lighter tanks and trucks move like supporting cast. Dust trails rise in thin banners, as if the desert is marking their path for someone else. He lowers the binoculars and speaks into the quiet. Few are free, but not yet. Not yet, because the trick of the 88 isn't just power. It's timing. The British advance is a story. The 88 crew wants to interrupt it at the exact word that breaks the sentence. The gun commander checks his watch, then the range. He watches the lead Matilda roll into a shallow dip, just enough to expose a cleaner angle on the hull. He watches the formation tighten as the tanks approach the pass, funneling into the terrain like water into a narrow channel. A perfect place for a weapon that doesn't need to chase, only to wait. You can almost hear the little sounds inside the gun pit now. A breath held too long, a belt buckle tapping metal, the faint click of a sight adjustment. The loader slides the round into the breech, and the mechanism closes with a heavy, final clack, like a door being locked. The layer whispers the traverse correction. The gun commander nods once, and then, finally, he gives the word that turns morning into a nightmare. Fewer. The 88 fires with a crack that feels too sharp for something this large, more like a whip than a cannon, followed by a concussion that slaps the air flat. Dust leaps off the ridge. The barrel recoils and returns. The next round is already in motion. Down on the flats, the lead Matilda takes the hit and, at first, doesn't explode like in movies. It just stops. A tank that has been moving with steady confidence suddenly freezes in place as if the desert itself has grabbed its tracks. Smoke begins to seep from somewhere it shouldn't. The turret hesitates. The vehicle's posture changes, subtle but unmistakable. It's no longer advancing. It's done. For the British crews behind it, the moment is confusing in the worst way. They don't see an enemy tank. They don't see a gun flash. They only see their lead vehicle halt, then another shudder, then another. A line of armored certainty begins to break apart one motionless hull at a time. The second shot lands. Another Matilda jerks, then settles. The 88's rhythm becomes brutal and mechanical. Load, aim, fire, like a metronome counting down lives. In the gun pit, the crew's calm isn't cruelty. It's survival. Because they know what happens if the British push through the pass. They know what a breakthrough looks like. They know how quickly we're fine becomes we're overrun. So they keep firing. And the men in those tanks, men who believe their armor made them untouchable, are suddenly learning the opposite lesson at terrifying range. Armor doesn't matter if the enemy can reach through it. Not with luck. With math. The gun commander squints through the sight picture, tracking the next silhouette. Dust is thick now, drifting and swirling, hiding the ridge, hiding the gun. From below, it might look like death is coming from the desert itself. And somewhere in that dust, a British commander raises binoculars and finally spots what he thinks is the source. A long barrel, a low profile, a shape on the ridge. For a split second, he thinks, tank. A single German tank positioned perfectly. Then the next muzzle flash blooms, brighter than it should be, and he realizes too late. It's not a tank. It's worse. And as the 88 crew swings onto its next target, the gun commander gives a quiet order that feels almost gentle compared to what it does. Next vehicle. Same range. Because the pass is full of metal now, stuck, burning, blocked, and the tanks behind are about to learn what the front already knows. When the lead stops moving forever, the rest of the column becomes a waiting room. The lead Matilda sits dead in the sand like a monument that arrived too early. Its engine note is gone. No track movement. No slow crawl forward. Just a black, hulking shape that was supposed to be unstoppable. Now frozen in the open, exactly where every following tank can see it. For a British crewman in the second vehicle, the sight punches through training and doctrine. Matildas don't just stop. Not from a few anti-tank guns. Not at this range. So the instinct is to keep rolling, push through, get to the crest, find the enemy armor, crush it under weight, and steal. But the ridge fires again. Another flat whip crack of an 88. Too sharp, too clean, followed by the delayed thump of impact. A second Matilda shudders, then settles into stillness like a wounded animal, deciding it can't stand. No dramatic movie fireball, just a tank's posture changing. A hatch flutters open for a second, then slams shut again. Smoke begins to seep out in a thin, hateful line. Down in the column, confusion spreads faster than fear. Because fear needs a shape, and the British can't see the shape. All they see is the effect, tanks stopping one by one, like an invisible hand is pressing a finger onto each vehicle and saying, "You done." Somewhere in the rear, a troop leader barks into his throat mic, demanding spotting reports, target identification, anything. Through a periscope slit, the ridgeline wavers in heat shimmer. Dust and morning glare turn the world into a mirage. The Germans on the ridge don't look like conquerors. They look like men doing a job. The gun commander, down in the scrape under netting, keeps his voice calm because calm is how you keep a crew steady when the enemy is still advancing. Range same. Traverse a fraction. The layer's hand turns the wheel. The barrel moves like a deliberate finger pointing. The loader rams another round home. The breech shuts with that heavy, final clack. Fire. The recoil kicks dust into the air. The shield plate quivers. The next round is already coming up. This is the truth Allied tank crews will learn about the 8.8 centimeters flak in the anti-tank roll. It isn't just penetration. It's reach, a gun that can engage armor at distances where the tank crews can't even see the threat clearly yet. And at Holfaya Pass, that reach turns the pass into a trap. Because Holfaya is an open desert, it's a funnel. A narrow approach bordered by escarpment and hard ground that forces armor into predictable lanes. The Matildas, built for slow, grinding assaults, are now moving into a place where speed doesn't save you and armor isn't enough. A British commander tries the obvious solution, find the guns with fire. But what do you shoot when you can't see it? Matilda main guns thunder, 2-pounder shots cracking out toward the ridge, yet the rounds are small and the targets are hidden. Dust erupts where shells hit, but it's guesswork. It's throwing stones into a fog and hoping you hit a man. The 88s don't guess. They keep picking tanks. One command, one shot, one vehicle that stops moving forever. And then something worse happens. The column begins to bunch up. A stalled Matilda becomes a roadblock. Tanks behind it have to detour, slow, pivot, showing flank angles they never wanted to show. The attack becomes a traffic jam under fire, and each second spent maneuvering is another second the 88 crews can calmly reload. On the ridge, the German defenders aren't improvising. By June 1941, they've already learned what the British are about to learn the hard way. An anti-aircraft gun, dug in and used as an anti-tank weapon, can dominate ground it was never meant to. Holfaya Pass gains its nickname for a reason. Holfaya Pass. British accounts of Operation Battle Axe describe Matildas immobilized by mines and then hammered by well-concealed 88s as they came into range. An attack that ends with 11 Matildas lost in the Holfaya effort. Up on the ridgeline, a figure stands briefly in the open, just long enough to scan the killing ground with binoculars, then crouches again. German and Italian defenders at Holfaya are coordinated by officers who understand what they're holding, not just terrain, but a psychological choke point. One name tied to the defense here is Hauptmann Wilhelm Pastor Bach, credited in several accounts with commanding 88mm guns at the pass during Battle Axe. But the British crews below don't know his name. They only know the feeling of being watched, of being measured, of being selected. Inside a Matilda, the world is noise and heat and narrow vision. The driver feels the tank lurch as the commander orders a turn. The gunner tries to lay the sight onto a suspected position. Nothing but shimmering rock. The loader's hands work by routine, but his throat is dry. Then the hit comes. A violent, metallic bang that echoes through armor like a church bell struck with a hammer. The tank jolts. The crew flinches instinctively, shoulders tightening, teeth clacking. For a second the engine keeps going, then falters. Smoke. Heat. A smell like burned oil and electrical wiring. Someone shouts, "We're hit." The commander tries to traverse the turret and finds it stubborn, sluggish. Something has warped. The driver attempts to reverse, and the tank barely responds. The Matilda's promise, its armor, has become a cage. Outside, dust thickens as more British vehicles try to reposition. The ridge line remains almost serene. The guns are still hidden, still patient, still speaking in single syllables of destruction. And now the British face the most bitter realization of armored warfare. When your invincible tank stops, it becomes a target for everything else. A stationary Matilda is a landmark, a marker, a message. The men still moving have to decide, in seconds, whether to push forward into that message or pull back and admit the pass is lost for now. As the column hesitates, half advancing, half trying to turn, another 88 cracks and another tank shudders into stillness. Up on the ridge, the gun commander doesn't celebrate. He simply shifts his aim again, calm as a man turning pages, because he knows the truth the British are only now discovering. The 88 isn't just a gun. It's a presence, a tank you can't see, a killer you can't out-armor, a weapon that makes distance feel meaningless. And as the smoke rises from the stranded Matildas below, the German crew prepares for the next phase, because this is only the first act of the legend. Soon, Allied tankers all across North Africa will start reporting the same thing in different places. A tank that never showed itself, that killed from impossible range, and vanished back into camouflage before anyone could return the favor. Holfaya Pass is where the rumor is born. Not the official report, not the after-action summary. The rumor, the kind that travels faster than paperwork because it's carried by men who just watched armor die like it was thin tin. In dusty leaguers and under canvas at night, British tank crews begin to say it to each other in low voices. Watch the ridges. Don't silhouette yourself. If you hear that crack, you're already late. Some of them swear they saw a German tank up there. A single machine positioned perfectly, killing at range, then disappearing. It makes sense to the mind because the mind wants a familiar enemy. But it isn't a tank. It's worse, because you can flank a tank. You can outmaneuver a tank. You can bait a tank into exposing itself. A gun dug into rock and sand, camouflaged, ranged, patient, doesn't chase you. It waits for you to chase it. And after Battle Axe, the 88's reputation starts spreading across North Africa like a shadow that lengthens with every sunrise. In the Desert War, distance is deceptive. The flat horizon makes everything look closer than it is. A tank commander sees a ridge line and thinks, we can reach that in minutes. He doesn't think a gun on that ridge can reach me right now. But the 8.8 centimeters flak can. At ranges where British 2-pounders struggle, the 88 can still punch with lethal authority. especially against early war British armor that relied on thickness more than slope and against silhouettes that can't hide on open flats. The Germans learned quickly how to turn that reach into a hunting style. They don't roll the guns around like artillery. They sight them like ambush predators. A ridge line with good fields of fire. A pass that funnels movement. A dry wadi that forces vehicles to slow. Then camouflage, netting, brush, shadows, dummy positions. The gun crews become artists in their own brutal way. They learn how to make a lethal weapon look like nothing. And when the armor comes, they wait until the first target commits. Because the first kill is more than a kill. It's a blockage. A stopped tank becomes a barricade. It forces the next tank to maneuver. Maneuver exposes flank. Exposed flank becomes a second kill. The column bunches, and the killing ground becomes a machine. This is how an 88 eats tigers. Not literally tigers the tank, not 1941 Holfaya, but tigers in the broader legend sense. It eats the confidence of armored crews. It eats the idea that you're safe because you're armored. Later in the war, the myth will evolve. Allied crews in Europe will talk about being hit by an 88, even when it's something else, because 88 becomes shorthand for a particular kind of death, distant, sudden, final. But in North Africa, the 88 is very real, and it's learning. And the men facing it start to adapt too. British commanders begin to treat ridgelines like threats. They use artillery and smoke more aggressively. They send infantry to probe for guns. They try to outflank positions rather than charge through them. They learn to respect what a concealed anti-tank weapon can do when it isn't firing as a last resort, but as a planned execution. Still, adaptation doesn't erase fear, because the 88 has another advantage beyond range and penetration. It can lie. A gun can stay silent until it wants to speak. A tank often has to move to be useful. Movement reveals. A gun can sit quiet for hours, letting an enemy believe the route is safe until the enemy commits everything to it. That's the kind of weapon that turns battles into stories. And in 1942, another story begins to crystallize around the 88, one with a name that becomes inseparable from desert warfare in the Western imagination. Erwin Rommel. Rommel is not personally manning the gun, but his forces use the 88 with a kind of ruthless creativity that fits his reputation. In multiple engagements, most famously around Arras in 1940 and later in North Africa, German accounts and Allied reports alike emphasize how the 88 was used in ground roles when conventional anti-tank weapons were insufficient. The gun becomes a tool not just for killing tanks, but for shaping the enemy's decisions, forcing caution, forcing detours, forcing an attacker to slow down and bleed momentum. And momentum in the desert is everything, because the desert is a battlefield of movement and fuel. If you can make the enemy hesitate, you can make him run out of time. The 88 isn't the only reason the Afrika Korps survives and stings as long as it does, but becomes one of the symbols of that survival. A psychological weapon as much as a ballistic one. Imagine a British armored troop rolling at speed toward a low rise. The commander scans. No panzers, no muzzle flashes. He relaxes just a fraction. Then, from a place his eyes dismissed as empty, comes that crack. The shell arrives a heartbeat later. In the lead tank's turret stops turning. The troop leader realizes, in the worst possible way, that he didn't spot a weapon. He drove into a decision someone else made hours ago. That's what the 88 becomes in the desert, a pre-written ending. But war never lets a weapon stay myth forever without demanding proof. And the proof will come when Allied armor gets better, when Shermans arrive, when tactics evolve, when the battlefield shifts from open desert to hedgerows and villages. The question waiting ahead is simple, and it terrifies the gun crews as much as it terrifies tankers. When everyone knows about the 88, when everyone is watching the ridges, can it still ambush the world? Because somewhere in Europe, years later, an Allied tank column will roll through morning mist believing the desert legends are far away. And on the edge of a village, behind a stone wall, an 88 crew will lay their sights on a silhouette and prove the legend never belonged to one place. It belonged to distance. And distance is everywhere. November 18th, 1944. 7:32 a.m. near Geilenkirchen. Wet fields on the edge of the Siegfried Line. The mist sits low and stubborn, turning hedgerows into smudges and trees into gray skeletons. Somewhere beyond the next field, engines throb. Allied armor moving up, careful but confident, tracks grinding through mud that tries to swallow them. In this kind of morning, you don't see the battlefield. You hear it, a Sherman's engine note, the clink of track on stone, a faint shout carried by damp air. Everything softened by fog, everything closer than it looks. Behind a stone wall half collapsed by earlier shelling, an 88 crew is already awake in the most dangerous way. Fully still, fully focused, refusing to move unless movement is necessary. Their gun is not on a proud mount now. It's dug in low, deliberately ugly. Shield plate streaked with mud, muzzle hidden by netting and branches. The barrel points into the white-gray world like a finger poised over a trigger. The gun commander, young enough to look like he should be in a classroom instead of a trench, watches through binoculars from a slit in the camouflage. His breath fogs the lenses. He wipes it with a sleeve that's already wet and stained. Beside him, the layer's eye is at the sight. The loader has a round ready, brass casing dull from grime. The projectile's nose catching a faint sheen of morning light. The crew's movements are minimal, efficient, practiced. They know the rule. A concealed gun wins by remaining concealed. Across the field, Allied infantry has already learned to fear anything that doesn't look right. Every hedgerow could be a machine gun nest, every farmhouse a fortress, every open gap a kill zone. But tanks are meant to solve that fear. Tanks are meant to push through. So when the Shermans appear, shapes emerging from fog, there's a brief, almost hopeful lift in the infantry's posture. Steel is coming. Wait. Firepower. A promise that the enemy will be forced back. Then the first Sherman crosses an invisible line in the gun commander's head. Range. Angle. Silhouette. He doesn't speak loudly. Loud isn't needed. He says the word that turns the fog into a sentence with a period. Fewer. The 88 fires. The blast is a physical shove that hits the crew in the chest. Dust and steam burst from the gun pit. The sound doesn't echo much. Fog eats echoes, but the concussion is unmistakable. A flame flickers at the muzzle, then vanishes. Out in the mist, the shell hits the lead Sherman with a hard, metallic clang that carries even through damp air. The tank doesn't explode. It just changes. Its forward motion stops with an ugly jerk. The turret pauses mid-traverse like the crew inside has been interrupted mid-thought. Smoke begins to curl from the engine deck. A hatch pops open a few inches, then slams shut as if the man inside reconsidered the outside world. Behind it, the next Sherman brakes hard, tracks churning mud. The column tightens. And that's exactly what the 88 wants. A kill isn't only metal destroyed. It's formation broken, momentum stolen, confidence punctured. The gun commander doesn't gloat. He doesn't even watch long. He is already hunting the next silhouette. Next target. Left vehicle. The layer shifts the barrel by degrees, the way you move a rifle. Except this rifle can tear through armor at distances that feel like cheating. The loader slams the next round into the breech. The mechanism closes. Fire. A second Sherman takes the hit. This one lower, punching into hull. The tank shudders, then sits dead in the mud. Smoke thickens. A faint orange glow appears inside as something begins to burn. And now the fog becomes a trap. Because the Allied crews can't immediately see the gun. They can't see the muzzle flash clearly. They only feel the impact sudden, final, and the instinct to react is tangled. Reverse? But reversing exposes you longer. Advance? But advancing takes you deeper into the kill zone. Swing off the road? But the fields might be mined or boggy. And somewhere in the back of every tanker's mind is the whisper of the old desert stories. 88. Even if they don't know it's an 88 yet, they know the feeling. Being hit by something you didn't see from farther away than your instincts want to accept. The Allied troop commander calls for smoke. Infantry pops smoke grenades. Mortars begin dropping rounds. A white curtain starts to form, thickening the fog into a wall. It helps, but it also blinds, and blindness is dangerous when you're trying to coordinate steel in narrow lanes. The 88 crew keeps firing into silhouettes when they appear, brief glimpses through mist, the angle of a turret, the squared-off nose of a Sherman. It becomes a rhythm. Spot. Range. Fire. And on the Allied side, move. Stop. Smoke. Confusion. Somewhere behind the column, artillery begins to answer. Shells crash into the hedgerow line, exploding earth and branches, trying to smash whatever gun is doing this. Machine guns rake, likely positions. A Sherman swings its turret and fires into the fog, the shot cracking away and hitting nothing visible. From inside the gun pit, The 88 crew hears the counterfire and understands the second rule of their craft. You don't stay in one place forever, because eventually the enemy stops guessing. Eventually, he saturates the whole area. Eventually, a shell lands on your exact patch of earth and ends your war in one bright instant. So the gun commander makes a choice: calm, brutal. One more, then displace. The loader rams in another round. The layer steadies. The gun fires again. A third tank is hit. This time the turret is visibly affected, the big steel dome jerking as the projectile slams in. The Sherman's gun droops. The vehicle slows, then stops like something that has finally accepted it is beaten. Now the smoke and fog are thick enough that the gun's own position begins to feel protected. But protection is temporary. The counter-barrage is walking closer. Dirt and stone chips spray into the pit. The gun commander raises his hand. Move. And the crew begins the terrifying part: breaking down and relocating a weapon that feels like it weighs as much as fate. They work fast, hands on levers, wheels, trails, dragging the gun back behind cover toward a prepared alternate position. Sweat runs under collars despite the cold, because this is how the 88 survives modern battlefields. Not by being invincible, by being there, then gone. A killer that leaves only stopped tanks and unanswered questions. Out in the mist, the Allied column is now stalled around burning hulks. Men dismount, crouch in ditches, try to find the gun with eyes and binoculars and rage. They call for engineers. They call for artillery. They call for anything that can kill what they can't see. And as the 88 crew disappears into a new fold of terrain, the gun commander takes one last look back at the field through fog. 3 tanks motionless, smoke curling upward like signals. A column that was supposed to push forward now pinned in place. He doesn't smile. He just tightens his jaw, because he knows the war isn't about one ambush. The war is about repeating the ambush until you run out of guns or the enemy runs out of tanks. And somewhere in the Allied line, a tanker climbs out of a crippled Sherman, looks toward the hedgerows, and says the sentence that turns equipment into myth. It was one gun. He pauses, disbelief thick in his voice. One gun, and it ate the whole lead. The first rule: the 88 crew lives by his range. The second rule is disappearance. Because once an 88 reveals itself, once it speaks, every Allied instinct on the line turns into a single obsession. Find that gun. Kill that gun. After the third Sherman stops moving, the fog doesn't feel like cover anymore. It feels like a spotlight that just hasn't turned on yet. The crew drags the gun back behind the hedgerow, wheels sinking into mud, boots slipping. Steel trail scrape stone. Hands yank at the traversing mechanism. No one talks above a rasp. Their breathing is loud enough. Behind them, the field they just owned starts to answer with anger. Artillery begins walking closer in a slow pattern. Thump, 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 each shell landing slightly nearer than the last. It's not accurate yet, but it doesn't have to be. This isn't a sniper duel. It's a saturation problem. The Allies don't need to hit the gun exactly. They only need to make the gun crew abandon it. A shell bursts just beyond the wall and sprays rock fragments into the pit like thrown knives. Someone yelps, more surprise than pain, then checks his face for blood with shaking fingers. The gun commander doesn't look at him long. He can't afford sympathy. Sympathy is time. Time is how you die. They reach the alternate position, a shallow scrape behind a thicker bank, a place chosen earlier because veteran crews always choose places before they need them. The gun drops into place. Trails spread, wheels chalked. The shield plate faces the same killing ground from a slightly different angle, as if the weapon itself has taken one step sideways in the fog. The commander peers through a narrow slit in the camouflage. The Allied column is stuck now. 2 burning tanks and 1 cripple in the lead have turned the lane into a choke point. Infantry crawl into ditches, keeping their heads down. Somewhere, a radio crackles. Urgent, clipped, calling for engineers, calling for smoke, calling for artillery to smash the hedgerow line. The 88 crew knows what comes next. A hunt. Because once tanks stop, infantry starts looking. And infantry, unlike tanks, can crawl into dead ground. Infantry can use folds in terrain. Infantry can close the distance until an 88's reach means nothing. The gun commander watches for a moment and sees it. Movement low in the ditch line. A small group of figures, helmets barely visible, creeping forward in bursts, covered by smoke. He raises his hand. No dramatic shouting, just a flat command that lands like a blade. Machine gun, right? Keep them down. A crewman swings the MG and fires short bursts, not to kill so much as to pin, because pinning is time, and time is everything. But the Allies are learning, too. They've learned not to charge blindly into open ground. They've learned to crawl, to use smoke, to force the gun to fire again so they can get a better fix on its position. A Sherman farther back fires high explosive into the hedge line. The impact tears branches apart and showers the gun pit with leaves and dirt. The 88 crew flinches, but they don't run. Yet, because they've also learned something about their own weapon that no one told them when it was still an anti-aircraft gun. On the ground, this thing doesn't just kill tanks. It attracts every kind of wrath a battlefield can produce. A spotter, somewhere on higher ground, finally catches a clue, a puff of smoke, a disturbance, a slight unnatural line in the hedgerow. He doesn't need certainty. He just needs a grid square, and then the counterfire becomes real. A heavier salvo slams down closer, violent enough to suck air from lungs. Dirt rains into the pit. One of the crew curses and wipes mud from his eyes. The commander feels the ground shake and tastes the cold metallic tang of fear rising behind his teeth. He glances at his men. They're good, trained, hardened, but they're still just men trapped in a hole while the sky throws steel at them. He understands the third rule now, the one nobody says out loud. If you stay too long, the enemy will eventually win by probability. So he makes a choice that feels like cutting off his own hand. Cease fire. The layer looks at him, confused, almost offended, as if silence is surrender. The commander doesn't blink. Cease fire. Hold. They stop shooting, even though targets are still there. Even though tanks are still visible. Even though the temptation to fire one more perfect shot is burning in their fingers. Because firing again would be a confession. It would give the enemy another flash, another sound, another exact point to aim at. So they let the column breathe. They let the smoke roll. They let the Allies crawl closer, just a little, because sometimes you survive by refusing to speak. Minutes pass that feel like hours. The barrage slackens slightly as the artillery shifts to other suspected positions. The infantry probing the ditch line pauses, uncertain. They don't want to rush a hedge with a gun behind it. Not after what they just saw. In that pause, the 88 crew does the most dangerous thing a gun crew can do. They move again. Hands fly to the trails. Wheels lift. Men strain, boots digging in. The gun is dragged back into a narrow farm track, then behind a stand of trees where the fog is thicker and the ground dips. They don't move far. They don't need far. They just need different. Because different breaks the enemy's aim. Different saves your life. As they haul the gun into concealment, the commander catches a glimpse of the burning Shermans through gaps in the trees, smoke twisting upward, black against white mist. He knows those tanks will be recovered later, photographed, discussed. And he knows what the survivors will say. They'll say they were hit by a tank they couldn't see. They'll say the enemy had a Tiger somewhere. They'll say 88, like it's a creature, not a caliber. And here's the cruel twist the war is building toward. One that makes the title's promise feel inevitable. The same 8.8 centimeters concept that started life pointing at aircraft becomes so feared on the ground that the Germans eventually put an 8.8 inside a tank on purpose. They turn the gun into a turreted predator. They give it armor. They give it a name the Allies will whisper like a curse. Tiger. And from that point on, the confusion completes itself, because now the tank and the gun become the same nightmare, just packaged differently. But that future isn't here yet. Right now, in this wet European morning, it's still a flat gun crew in the mud, hauling their weapon into a new hiding place while Allied infantry creeps forward, searching for a target that has already moved. The hunter becomes the hunted. And the next ambush won't be about long range. It'll be about whether the crew can vanish fast enough before the men in the ditch line reach the hedgerow and finally discover what's been killing them. The fog is thick enough to muffle the world, but it can't muffle intent. Down in the ditch line, Allied infantry moves with the slow patience of men who have learned what impatience costs. They don't stand up. They don't bunch up. They crawl in short bursts. Helmet first, shoulders low, using the shallow cut of earth like a trench carved by fear. Every few yards, they pause and listen, not for voices, for metal, for the scrape of trails being moved, for the faint clack of a breach, for the accidental cough of an engine, for anything that suggests the gun is still there, still pointed at the lane like a loaded sentence. Smoke drifts across the field in waves, turning the burning Shermans into dim orange ghosts. The heat from the fires warps the air even through the mist. It's a sick contrast, Cold fog, hot metal, the smell of fuel and wet soil mixing into something you can taste on the back of your tongue. Behind the stalled column, the troop commander is trying to build order out of chaos. Radios crackle. A mortar section drops more smoke. An artillery liaison calls for another concentration on suspected positions. But none of that changes the simple truth in the ditch. To kill the gun, someone has to get eyes on it. And to get eyes on it, someone has to crawl to where it's been speaking from. A corporal in the lead, mud on his sleeves, rifle hugged close, raises his fist and the little column freezes. He points ahead where the hedge line breaks around a damaged stone wall. It's a place that feels wrong. A place where the hedgerow has been disturbed in a way nature doesn't disturb itself. A place where the ground looks slightly more churned than it should. A gun position. Maybe. He signals two men to move left, one to cover right. They slip forward like shadows, trying not to cast themselves. You can almost feel the nerves in their hands. Every grip too tight, every breath too loud inside a helmet. They've seen what the 88 does. They've seen steel stop dead with a single hit. They've seen men bail out of burning tanks and fall back into ditches like the earth itself is the only safe thing left. Now they're close enough that they can smell it. Not smoke, oil and hot metal. The residue a gun leaves behind when it has been firing hard. The corporal inches up to the stone wall and peeks over. Nothing. Just branches, netting a dark shape that could be a stump, could be a shield plate, could be death. He forces himself to look longer, because glancing is how you miss the thing that kills you. Still nothing moves. He looks down and sees something that makes his stomach tighten. A shallow groove in the mud, like something heavy was dragged backward in a hurry. The gun has moved, or it's sitting just beyond, waiting for the curious men to stand up and confirm it. He signals again, this time slower. Advance. Carefully. They creep around the wall. And there it is. The place where the gun was. The scrape is obvious now. The churned earth. The flattened grass. The imprint of a cruciform mount. Empty shell casings half sunk in mud like brass fingerprints. A broken branch still tangled in netting. The faint smell of burned propellant that lingers like a ghost of the last shot. No gun. The corporal stares for a second, almost offended by the emptiness. He'd built the enemy into something monstrous in his mind, an iron beast behind the hedge line. And now, all he has is mud and silence. But silence doesn't mean safety. Silence means the gun is somewhere else. And somewhere else means it could still be aimed at the lane. He turns and signals the others. Position clear, gun displaced. A runner starts back toward the tanks, hunched low, sprinting in short bursts so he doesn't silhouette himself against the smoke. Behind him, the ditch line begins to push forward again, fanning out to search for the new position. Because now the battle has shifted into a hunting pattern. Small groups probing the terrain, trying to catch a long gun before it bites again. And the 88 crew, hidden behind a stand of trees, is listening to all of it. They hear the distant murmur of infantry movement. They hear the occasional crack of a rifle as someone fires at a suspected shadow. They hear the artillery adjust, the impacts moving like footsteps, closer, closer, probing for the new hide. The gun commander crouches behind his shield plate, watching through a slit in the camouflage. His men are tired now in the way you get tired when adrenaline is replaced by repetition. They've killed tanks. They've displaced under counterfire. They've survived the first wave of pursuit. Now, they have to decide if they can do it again, or if this is the moment to stop being a hunter and become a survivor. A messenger crawls in from the side. Another German soldier, breath steaming, eyes wide. He whispers something to the commander, urgent, short. Allied infantry is pushing wider. There's an attempt to flank. Engineers are being brought up. Someone is trying to bring a tank around the far side to get an angle into the hedgerow line. The commander feels the battlefield tightening like a noose. The 88 is powerful, but it's not magic. It needs sight lines. It needs space. And if the enemy gets close enough, if they get inside the gun's minimum comfort zone, then the crew's legend becomes irrelevant. At close range, it's just men with pistols and an MG crouched behind a piece of steel. He looks at his crew and makes the next decision with the same calm he used to choose targets. We fire only if we must, he murmurs. The layer nods, jaw clenched, eyes flicking toward the lane where a Sherman silhouette might appear through fog. The loader keeps a round ready, but doesn't load it because loading is noise and commitment. And then, through the mist, the faint shape of an Allied tank appears again. Farther back, tentative, trying to peek around the choke point like an animal testing an electric fence. The gun commander's breath slows. He could kill it. He knows he could, but he also knows what that kill would buy them. A new muzzle flash, a new fix, a new storm of artillery, a closer infantry probe. The legend of the 88 isn't built on firing forever. It's built on firing just enough, then vanishing. So he holds. The tank lingers, then withdraws slightly, its commander uncertain. And that uncertainty is the ghost army of the 88, an enemy forced to hesitate because the weapon might be anywhere. But hesitation cuts both ways, because while the Allies hesitate, they also organize. And somewhere out in the fog, you hear a new sound, different from artillery, different from engines. A sharp, staccato crackle that grows louder as it approaches. Not tanks, not infantry, aircraft, low, fast, hunting the hedgerows with rockets and cannon fire. Because when you can't see a gun, you let the sky rake the ground until something stops being hidden. The German gun commander looks up through branches, and for the first time since the ambush began, his calm breaks into something sharper. Because this is the nightmare for a static gun. The enemy's eyes in the air, and the first pass is already coming in. The first pass comes in low enough that you feel it before you see it. A rippling, tearing sound, like canvas being shredded. Then the engine note punches through the fog, and for a second the world above the hedgerow is full of motion. A dark shape flashes overhead, too fast to identify cleanly through branches, but you don't need to. The 88 crew knows what it is by what it does next. The hedgerow line erupts, not with one explosion, with a chain, a string of detonations that runs along the ground like someone is dragging fire across the earth. Dirt and leaves explode upward. Branches snap. The air fills with a hiss of fragments. Rockets, or cannon fire walking the line. Either way, it's the same message delivered from above. Your camouflage isn't enough anymore. The gun commander throws himself lower, pressing into mud that feels suddenly warm from shockwaves. His crew follows instinctively. The shield plate rings as fragments smack it. Someone yells and clamps a hand to his helmet, as if holding it down will protect his skull. Then it's gone. The aircraft's engine note fades past, and the world returns to fog and ringing ears. Except the battlefield is different now. Because once aircraft are called in, the game changes. An 88 can dominate a lane when the only eyes searching are at ground level. But from the sky, the battlefield becomes a map again. Hedgerows and fields, tree lines and smoke plumes, disturbances in the pattern. Even in fog, pilots can spot the unnatural, the wrong churn in the dirt, the wrong straight line, the wrong shadow under netting. And once a pilot sees something wrong, he doesn't need to identify it perfectly. He just has to hit the area until it stops being a threat. The gun commander lifts his head a few inches and scans through branches. The lane where the Shermans were pinned is still there, still blocked by burning hulks. Smoke thickens. Infantry movement is harder to track now because everyone is hugging cover, expecting more passes. He turns to his crew. Damage. A man shakes his head, eyes wide. Another touches his sleeve and finds it torn, but not bloody. The gun itself looks intact, but the camouflage around it has been shredded. Netting ripped, branches blown away. The position is starting to look like what it is, a gun pit. And that's fatal, because the next pass will be aimed, not guessed. The commander makes the decision without hesitation now. Displace. Immediately. This isn't graceful. It can't be. A gun like this doesn't leap up and run. The crew works in a blur. Hands on trails, wheels lifted, outriggers folded. Mud sucks at boots. The gun's weight fights them like an animal that doesn't want to move. Another engine note rises, second aircraft, maybe, or the same one circling back. They drag the gun into the trees, branches whipping their faces, the barrel pushing through leaves like a spear. Someone grunts with effort. Another man slips and catches himself on the shield plate. Nobody stops, because stopping is how you die when the sky has your number. Behind them, the second pass hits where they were. The old position erupts, earth and splinters and smoke, turning the gun pit into a cratered mess. If they'd stayed 10 more seconds, they'd be inside that explosion. A crewman looks back once and swallows hard. The commander doesn't let him stare. Keep moving. They reach a deeper fold in the terrain, lower ground, thicker trees, a place where the gun can be hidden not just by netting, but by landscape. The commander chooses it fast, the way you choose shelter in a storm, anything that blocks the wind. They drop the gun into position, trail spread, barrel angled toward the lane again. But now their sight lines are worse. Trees interfere. Fog thickens. The killing field is less clean. And that's the trade you make when you're hunted. You sacrifice perfection for survival. Out on the lane, the Allied column begins to loosen slightly. Infantry pushes forward in small groups. Engineers start probing the ground for mines and routes around the blocked vehicles. The tank that had been peeking returns, more confident now that aircraft have cleared the hedgerow line. The 88 crew watches it through gaps in trees. The loader whispers, almost pleading, "We can take it." The commander knows they can. One shot, maybe two, a clean kill at range. A reminder that the gun still exists. But now the sky has already tasted blood. One muzzle flash, one burst of smoke, and aircraft will come back. Artillery will tighten. Infantry will rush the ground. He feels the temptation, heavy real. Then he feels the responsibility, heavier. Because the truth of the 88 legend is not endless slaughter. It's selective violence. So he holds again. The Sherman rolls forward cautiously, gun trained toward the hedgerows. The crew inside thinks they've neutralized the threat, or at least displaced it far enough to be irrelevant. That confidence is dangerous. But the commander waits. He waits for the Sherman to commit into a position where it cannot reverse easily, where it will be forced to turn, forced to show flank, forced to slow. Because if he's going to speak again, it has to be worth the price. And as the Sherman creeps closer into the lane, the commander sees something that makes his breath tighten. A second tank behind it. And infantry fanning out. They're pushing. The choke point is about to break. If it breaks, the 88 crew's earlier kills become meaningless, and the Allies roll forward. This is the moment where myth and reality collide. If he stays silent, the enemy advances. If he fires, the enemy hunts. He chooses the only answer his role allows. He signals to the loader. Load. The brass case slides into the breech. The mechanism shuts with that familiar clack. Final, irreversible. The layer settles his eye at the sight, tracking the Sherman's silhouette through branches and mist. The commander whispers the range. Then, just as the Sherman's nose crosses the line, just as it commits into the lane, he gives the word again. Fewer, and the gun speaks. But this time, the enemy isn't only on the ground. This time, the sky is listening too. The 88's muzzle flash blooms through the trees like a camera flash in fog. Brief, bright, incriminating. The shell hits the Sherman with a brutal certainty. Through the branches, you see the tank's silhouette jerk, then sag, tracks slipping in mud, as if the machine suddenly forgot how to move. The turret twitches, one last reflex, then stills. Smoke starts to rise, thin at first, then thicker, curling into the mist like a signal flare. On the ground, Allied infantry freezes. You can almost feel the shock ripple through them. They had convinced themselves the threat was gone, or at least pushed away. They were beginning to move like men who believed the lane could be taken. And now, one gun has spoken again and proved it's still here. The troop commander shouts orders. Men dive into ditches. A radio barks coordinates. Someone yells for smoke. Somewhere a mortar drops a round that hisses and blooms, adding another layer of white to a battlefield already drowning in it. The 88 crew doesn't celebrate. They don't even watch the burning tank for long, because that single shot has bought them two things. A stopped tank, a death sentence that hasn't been carried out yet. The commander snaps the order like a whip. Displaced now, the loader is already pulling the spent casing, hands moving fast. The layer swings the barrel down a fraction, not to aim but to make it easier to move. Men grab trails and wheels, shoulders straining. Mud sucks at boots. The gun's weight feels doubled by panic. And then the sky answers. Not immediately, not like thunder, more like a door slamming somewhere far away. A rising engine note, fast, low, coming back in a tight circle. The commander looks up through bare branches and sees a dark shape ghosting through mist, banking. The aircraft has seen the flash, or the smoke, or the disturbance. It doesn't matter which. It's coming. The crew drags the gun into the trees again, branches whipping faces, metal clanking despite their attempts at silence. The commander's mind runs on pure geometry now. Distance to cover, time to impact, whether the terrain folds enough to hide them. They reach a shallow depression just as the aircraft makes its second pass. The world explodes behind them. Not a single blast, multiple impacts in a line, walking toward where the flash was. Dirt geysers. Trees splinter. The air fills with the angry hiss of fragments. The depression shakes as if the earth itself is trying to throw them out. A piece of wood slams into the shield plate with a crack like a rifle shot. A man screams, short, involuntary, then clamps his teeth hard and goes silent, eyes wide, checking his body with hands that tremble. The gun remains intact. The crew remains alive, but their camouflage is gone, and the enemy's aggression has sharpened. Now it isn't probing fire. Now it's search and destroy. Allied artillery begins to tighten in the same rhythm. Impact, adjust, impact again, bracketing. Infantry movement becomes bolder under the cover of smoke and aircraft. Engineers push forward with wire cutters and explosives, hunting for any position that could hide a gun. The 88 crew is running out of room to be clever. This is the moment where the myth of the one gun starts to crumble into reality. Because the legend of the 88 is built on clean fields of fire and patient kills. But real battlefields aren't clean. They're crowded with counters. Smoke, aircraft, artillery, infantry. And once the enemy has decided your gun is worth hunting, your job changes from killer to survivor. The gun commander wipes mud from his face and looks at his men, breathing hard, eyes bright with adrenaline. He sees the question in them without hearing it. Do we keep fighting, or do we save the gun and ourselves? He knows what higher command would want. Hold, delay, keep the lane blocked. He also knows what the battlefield is telling him. You can't keep firing from a shrinking hide. He weighs the value of one more kill against the probability of annihilation. And then, for the first time in this story, he makes a decision that feels like defeat, even though it's not. Withdraw. The word tastes bitter. But withdrawal is not cowardice. Withdrawal is math. The same kind of math the 88 has been using against tanks since the desert. Do what preserves your ability to kill tomorrow. They begin the most dangerous movement of all, pulling the gun away not just a few yards, but far enough to break contact. Wheels bounce over roots. Trails snag. Men grunt and curse under breath. They move in staggered bursts, pausing only long enough to listen for footsteps and engines and the growing noise of Allied momentum. Behind them, the lane begins to open. The Allies are pushing around the wrecks now. Engineers are finding routes. Infantry is seeping forward into the hedgerows. The 88 has slowed them, killed their lead, forced caution, bought time. But it hasn't stopped the war. Nothing stops the war. And that's where the legend of the 88 becomes something more complicated than a gun that eats tanks. Because for every ambush where an 88 dominated a field, there were other days where the Allies learned to counter it, where air power and artillery and infantry teamwork turned the hunter into prey. The 88's reputation remains because the reputation is built on the moments when it was unseen and unstoppable. But the truth is that even the most feared weapon is only as deadly as the situation allows. In the end, the gun crew disappears into deeper cover, and the battlefield behind them fills with Allied movement. The Shermans roll again, slowly, cautiously, guns trained, smoke drifting, infantry close. And somewhere in the fog, a tanker looks at the burning hull of the Sherman that just died and says, quietly, to no one in particular, 88, not as a number, as a warning, as a ghost. Because even when the gun is gone, the fear of it lingers. It makes men drive differently. It makes commanders ask for smoke sooner. It makes infantry probe harder. It shapes decisions. And that's how a weapon becomes more than metal. It becomes a presence that changes behavior even when it isn't firing. But the story of the 88 doesn't end with one ambush and fog. Its shadow stretches forward into the late war, into the way Germany builds the Tiger's main gun around the 8.8 concept, into the way Allied tank doctrine evolves to counter long-range killers. And it leaves one final bitter truth for anyone who ever sat inside a tank and believed in steel. Sometimes you don't die because the enemy has more tanks. Sometimes you die because the enemy has one gun, placed perfectly, and the patience to wait for you to believe you're safe. Yendi.